This is PTV World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali and you're watching Fault Lines. It was less than 2 months into Biden's presidency when US hosted the first Quad summit on Friday, where US President Joe Biden said that a free and open Indo-Pacific is essential. Quadrilateral Security Dialogue or Quad is an initiative to bring together US, India, Japan and Australia for a closer coordination. It is an informal strategic forum maintained through semi-regular summits, information exchanges and military drills among US, Japan, Australia and India. Initiated in 2007 by Japan, initially started as a dialogue. The Quad initiative soon started military exercises of massive scale. While India is signaling it as a major diplomatic accomplishment, the dialogue has so far established that Indo-Pacific is set to play a much bigger role in US foreign policy, with Asia being a top priority. The US is making it very clear that Indo-Pacific region is important to Washington compared to previous administration's transactional approach. In addition to shoring up alliances to potentially counter China, there are some specific bilateral issues as well to deal with. Apparently, there is an evident discomfort with China rising influence in the COVID vaccine industry. Quad's commitment to start the manufacturing of US vaccine in India to tune of 1 billion doses as an example. China is feeling they are being encircled by US. So far, it is for US to guess how China is going to push back. Watch this package and then we introduce our guest in the program.
The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue is an Indo-Pacific dialogue between United States, Japan, Australia, and India, the first official meeting at a senior level of which was held in 2007. The transition of the Quad alliance from a majorly bilateral to a mini-lateral alliance provided a momentum for the establishment of what has been dubbed as Quad 2.0, or a democratic security diamond. With growing foreign policy convergence among the four states, the Quad reformed in 2017 and initiated meeting on a bi-monthly basis. Many allege it to be a network to contain China and a genesis of an Asian NATO. Just as it did during the initial Quad in 2007, China has officially protested Quad 2.0 as a thinly veiled attempt at containment. Editorials in the state-run Chinese media have regularly lambasted the grouping as a threat to not simply China's own ascent to power, but also the traditional diplomatic touchstones such as ASEAN centrality. Further criticism can also be readily found attacking the Quad nations for insufficient care regarding the infrastructural needs of the Southeast Asian nations.
My first guest in the program is Tom O'Connor from Newsweek. He's joining my program over the telephone from New York. Tom, welcome to the program. My first question. Biden has started unfolding his agenda for Asia. Do you think it is more about China or is actually about making Asia right again?
Hi, for having me again on Fault Lines. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, one thing's clear, it's that the Biden administration is seeking to reverse what it sees as a retreat from the world stage taken under the previous administration. And Biden seems to be going about that by trying to secure support from allies and partners from across the region, across the world, but specifically in Asia. This message seems clearly predicated on the need to establish a US-led world order, an international rules-based order, as the Biden administration says, and what's consistent with Secretary Blinken's messaging, as well as the White House's own recent security guidance. Some countries can and probably will ignore this because they see the benefits of having good relations with the US, and these are many, and they're less interested in needing to have to project themselves as a great sovereign power. But China, on the other hand, it's in a unique position because it's large, wealthy, and powerful enough to project its own sphere of influence. And therefore, we're seeing these two worlds clashing. One looking to maintain, even expand US dominance, and that's military, economics, diplomacy. And the other is one of a rising power looking to find its own in the region, looking to establish itself and enhance its own footprint throughout Asia.
Thank you very much, Tom. Coming to you, Professor Yi, tell me, is this really America's strategy, as we see it here from Islamabad, as an attempt to block China from rising its influence or from rising any further in this region, or do you have a different take on that?
Yes, Quad country, including United States, Australia, Japan, and India. These four countries are very important and crucial player in the Indo-Pacific region or even at the global level. United States is the only superpower in the current world. Australia enjoyed a very unique geopolitical position and also has the very rich natural resources that's very crucial for all the emerging economy powers. And Japan is the leading economy power in Pacific region. India is the emerging superpower in Indian Ocean. So these four countries, they are very important and very crucial in the Indo-Pacific region. And if this country launched a very successful and practical cooperation, there means a lot for all the countries who live in these areas. But there is one essential fact we should remind. This, the Quad as an idea kind of is an implementation of the Indo-Pacific strategy proposal. This idea didn't come from the United States, didn't come from the 2017. This idea came from the 2006, and then the Japanese Premier Shinzo Abe, he visited to New Delhi. He proposed such kind of the concept to his Indian counterpart. From there till 2017, to the Donald Trump administration, almost 12 years, nothing happened. So these three countries are already there. I mean, Australia, Japan, and India. But even though they enjoy the very common ground of ideology, of the political agenda, but there's still nothing happened. And they talk only this kind of the talk club. Only American get this idea and put this idea into the Indo-Pacific strategy, the Donald Trump's national strategy. This Quad cooperation coming on the ground and get more and more fruitful achievement. So that means such kind of the influence is not only reflect their capacity, but also the intention. So with American support, this Quad can play a very important role. But if Americans change their mind or change their method, the Quad will be totally mean different. So the influence is there, but the actual achievement is something else.
Professor, how do you see Japan and Australia jumping into this equation, as they are a bit far from the main area where this all activity is happening? India perhaps has a strategic interest being in this region. United States has influence everywhere, interest everywhere in the world. But why Australia and why Japan?
Yes, Australia and Japan, they are both a very important and crucial alliance of the United States in the Pacific region. We can say that if Americans say jump, Australia and Japan, they will only say how high. But there's still a little bit of difference between these two countries. Australia, as a country's identity, Australians treat themselves as the Western country in Pacific region. I mean, the white country in Asian country, in Asian Pacific region. So they always take themselves as the vanguard of the Western civilization in the Pacific areas. Japan is different. Japan, they are the very crucial player or supporter of American strategy in Pacific region. In Japan's national security concept or strategy, Japan totally rely on America. So that for Japan, this means their economic ties with China is something they should be sacrificed to get Americans' protection. So although Australia and Japan have something in the common, but there's still a little bit of differences. And such kind of differences reflect in the couple of years before, in 2000, from the 2016, Australia get their relation with China get very, very tense, but Japan still carefully try to play a kind of the neutral position. Only when Joe Biden takes into power, Japan's policy has a little bit shift to more pro-American. So considering with the very assertive policy towards China of Australia, Japan is more careful. But still, these two countries, they will totally support Americans' strategy. If American ask them to break the ties with China, even involve some conflicts, in the future, such as in the South China Sea and so on, I think Japan and Australia, they have no other choice.
Tom, this is a very interesting take, as you heard from Beijing. Tell us about this Quad alliance going forward. It started from a platform of economic coordination, and then we saw it converging into something much larger than that, though it technically is a dialogue as yet. Do you see it transforming any further from this point onwards?
Well, to start with the US, it is, of course, a superpower. So the more it feels its sole status as the world's leading power is being threatened, the more it's going to lash out, and specifically in this case against China. India also is among the emerging countries on the world stage, and it has a direct land dispute with China at the line of actual control, which is, of course, a very sensitive topic for any country. And for these two, not only for their governments, but their populations as well. It's a matter of it's a territorial dispute with real national sovereignty at stake here. And that's what sparked these two escalations. Now, for Australia, the country is a Western colonial outpost in a rapidly developing region. And much of this development has been driven by China, linking their economies. So there's an identity crisis there. There's also a strategic desire to link up with like-minded powers, other powers that think the same, and there's a benefit that can be seen, mutual interest involved. But as far as how far Australia can go with this, if trade disruption hurts its natural interests, we have yet to see. And for Japan, is probably the most cautious country involved in this. There are disputed islands in the East China Sea. Japan's constantly concerned about what it sees as a military threat from both China and North Korea. But Japan has traditionally favored peaceful relationships with China, especially due to their heavy trade volume, though this could change as the Quad gets more aggressive.
Professor Yi, tell me, we are not able to understand this unique posture by India. It, on one end, is trying to diffuse crisis with China on its border, where there had been military skirmishes. But on the international canvas, is India trying to provoke China again? How do you see this from Beijing?
India's foreign policy is very strange, and they have their own characters. I think, in my personal understanding, India try to get closer to United States, but doesn't want to be treated as Americans' puppet or Americans' so-called security partners. Indian want to be treated equally when they involve the relationship with the United States or even with any other country. But this equal has a different concept or different terms. For India, this means India want to get every possible support from the United States, but didn't want to pay any price. Even the China factor is involved, India still holds such kind of the concept.
Tom, tell me, how do you foresee China responding to this crisis? It's very important to understand what China might do as an after effect of this entire happening. What is your personal take on it?
Well, China is understandably concerned about the world's most powerful military force surrounding it with strategic partners, two of which are treaty allies, and one of whom the People's Liberation Army has clashed with just a year ago. But it seems to me that China, the more it grows assertive in its language, the further it's going to alienate all the Asian Quad members, all Quad members, but specifically the Asian ones. And this seems to be the U.S. strategy right now, to undermine China's image, both at home and within the world stage, and ultimately undermine its strength. If China realizes that, then it's going to have to find both areas of cooperation with Quad members and at the same time invest in new relationships across the region, sensitive to other countries' national interests as well as its own. And this would be beyond just Belt and Road projects, which are significant, of course, but it would have to also perhaps even go as far as new security agreements, falling short, though, of military alliances, as as China has said themselves, that would not be conducive to their interests. The purpose here would not be to build a rival coalition, really, but to increase China's regional support, compelling countries to reject statements that the Quad puts out regarding China's image throughout the region, which it portrays as overwhelmingly negative.
And Professor Yi, how do you think China would respond to it? You just heard what Tom said. How far you agree with him on that?
Difference. Donald Trump, firstly, only care about the economy issue. So the Donald Trump, For his Chinese policy, economy is a priority, and they want to make the deal, the trade deal with China, and also try to cut the high-tech cooperation channel with China. So Donald Trump, for Donald Trump, this answer is quite easy: money, 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 always money. But for Joe Biden, the situation is quite different. Joe Biden is paid more attention on the security and the political aspect when the involve the China and the United States relation. That's the first difference. The second difference is that for Joe Biden, pay more attention on his alliance or partners role. They try to encourage his alliance in the Indian and Pacific region, such as the Australia, Japan, and India, to go forward to challenge China, to maintain China, or to contain China. But American will try to carefully maintain a minimal acceptable relationship or normalize the relationship with China. That means Joe Biden hope the rest of the member of the Quad, they will be the vanguard to challenge China to consume China's capacity in certain areas, and American will try to get the fruits. So American doesn't want to pay the price and ask his alliance to pay the price. And Donald Trump is different. Donald Trump want to deal with China by Americans themselves alone. So American can get all the possible economic fruits and take everything from this deal and doesn't want to share anything with his alliance. So compared with Joe Biden, we can say Donald Trump's policy is only focusing on the economy and more conservative. But Joe Biden is different. Joe Biden still want to be the global leader in this world and try to get together all the members and to contain China. So do the things by a group concept, not by themselves. These quite unique differences between Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Thank you very much, Professor Yi Haley. Thank you very much, Tom O'Connor, for again being my guest. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join back with the second segment of our program. Stay with us. Welcome back. With me, I have Syed Muhammad Ali. He's Director of Strategic Affairs, CAS, and a very regular guest in our program. Thank you very much, Muhammad Ali, for coming to this program. Tell me about Quad, what United States is trying to do with this region, and tell me specifically why Democrats have accelerated the process.
Thank you so much for choosing a very important topic in your show today. I think it's very important because you've already discussed the issue with Indian, American, and Chinese experts, but it's important for a Pakistani perspective to come before the international audience of PTV World. I think fundamentally what the US is doing is to recover from the two-decade-long war on terror and return to the great power competition.
Okay.
And that is the overarching global approach of the US, in which context we can understand not just the acceleration of Quad, but also the drawdown in Afghanistan, the attempts to repair relationship with Iran, and also to slightly recalibrate relations with Israel and reduce the defense commitments towards Western Europe. So what the US is doing is basically based on two fundamental things. US has realized the urgency that it has wasted its hard power in the last 2 decades fighting terrorism globally, but kinetically mostly, and it has been a mixed case. I will not go into the details whether it has been a success or failure, but I think it remains a work in progress, because although they won the battles in Iraq and Afghanistan, obviously they perhaps did not succeed in winning those battle successes into political victories in terms of the campaign successes
But you
of those
count
wars.
this as a failure of their hard power.
I think this was an excessive reliance over hard power and neglect of the US soft power, which dented their alliances globally, which shook their partnerships, which excessively provoked their emerging and returning potential challengers like both China and Russia. So, in this context, if you see Quad, the US defense posture, whether it is their Navy, whether it is their Air Force, and their strategic forces are balancing and coming excessively towards the Asia Pacific region, which the Americans now call Indo-Pacific. So this is very important, and they are accelerating the alliance build-up process with those countries, some of whom have been traditional allies like Japan, South Korea, with Australia.
But why Democrats accelerating it?
What I believe is the case that the build-up of the US and its Indo-Pacific strategy is a bipartisan policy. Their approach is slightly different. As your US guest said, and I agree with him, that while Mr. Trump was excessively relying on hard power and coercing the adversaries and pressurizing the allies, the Biden administration has realized that this approach has shaken the alliances, it has unnerved the partners. So they are trying to have a more diplomatic approach of offering more carrots and some sticks to the allies, including India.
Okay, okay. But tell us how this is going to affect the security architecture of the Asian region.
I think this is very important because the entire Asian continent is the most populated part of the world. It has most resources, it has most population, and unfortunately, it also has most conflicts. So the excessive build-up of hard power and its concentration in Asia-Pacific region does not augur well for peace, security, and stability. A more prudent approach, which was aptly highlighted by Pakistan's foreign minister in the recently concluded Islamabad Security Dialogue, was this prudent advice that the great powers should restrain themselves in shaping a new world order, which should be more stable, which should be more peaceful, which should be more cooperative and based on connectivity and interdependence and benefiting from each other's experiences, expertise and resources, rather than accelerating a build-up which would provoke China, antagonize Russia, and will lead to greater and accelerated arms race. And this at a time of unprecedented interdependence in technological, cultural, and economic domains means that the world faces a greater risk than at any other time in history. When most scholars compare the 21st century with 20th century, although there were wars, but the cost of conflict, the cost and the risk of escalation is unprecedented because the stakes are higher than ever. The WMD proliferation and the strategic and conventional build-up is greater than at any time in history. But this should not neglect the great opportunities that this globalized world and interdependent economic and trade relations offer. So that would be an imprudent approach.
You're right, but tell us about this Indian policy that is actually very complicating. On one side, we see that India was trying to disengage with China when both the countries were on the borders. And then we see India actually provoking China by calling international partners in the open oceans. And I was also reading one of your papers where you mentioned this Indra doctrine of Indian maritime. Can you tell us and interconnect the two if there is an interconnection?
Absolutely. I think there's a very important connection, and thank you for bringing it up. Because if you understand the Indian strategic character, it essentially aims to be a global power. That is a reality, whether we like it or not. But what we must warn our American friends is the reality that they should not neglect the Indian strategic ambitions, which are global, and they should not misread the Indian strategic culture, which was exposed in the Doklam crisis. That instead of going for a competition of escalation dominance with the neighboring China, they preferred to de-escalate, even at the cost of diplomatic and political humiliation for Modi regime. So this indicates, this is a good message for the Americans to read, that they should not neglect the fact that if you read and follow the trends of bilateral India-China and India-US economic relations, the trends are very similar. This indicates that if you look at the volume of bilateral trade between Beijing and New Delhi and Washington and New Delhi, they are very similar. 70, 80 billion dollars every year. 1 year it's 80 billion, 70 billion, 90 billion. That means India is maintaining equal trade and economic relations with both Beijing and Washington, despite the US expectation that it should help the US isolate economically.
The trade with China has come down massively.
Not as significantly as the US would want. There are three realities which I would like to share with you. 70% of the electronic goods that India imports come from China. If you look at the total combined volume of imported goods from China, it is equal to what they import from both UAE and US. So it is the economic dynamics of Indian economy are not going to be determined by Modi's Hindutva policy or its strategic alliance with the US. That is very important, because the Indian industrialist, trader and businessman will make calculations according to the cost effectiveness of the commodities. They are not, American industry cannot replace Chinese products for simple economic reasons. And the market and the consumer of India is not going to buy American goods to replace Chinese goods. That is why even America continues to import more Chinese goods than any other goods. So that means even American consumer prefers Chinese goods.
So you mean the will to curtail China is more American in nature and less Indian?
Absolutely, and it is only in the hard power domain. You cannot, in a globalized capitalist world order, which has excessive US influence, but that does not mean you can micromanage the economic dynamics and the trade policies of different countries, including that of India. China has huge trade with Australia, with Japan, with South Korea as well. And they are unlikely to give it up.
But will South Korea jump into the similar equation? Do you anticipate that?
South Korea, I must say, because of its excessive reliance and influence of US over its foreign and defense policy, is likely to remain basically a US ally in this region. And but it will not be used against China the manner in which in the containment project. So what I am trying to say briefly is that the US will deploy and is deploying excessive hard power in Asia Pacific region against China, and is encouraging regional partners and allies to also do that. But it is unlikely that the regional partners will review and restrict their profitable economic relations with China and not help containment in US project of US in China containment.
Mohammed, tell me, from Pakistan's perspective, we have great relationship with China. We have a history of relationship with the United States, and we are the neighborhood of India. How does this strategically affect Pakistan, or what should Pakistan's point of view be toward
Very
this
important
reliance?
question. I think briefly, I think the Quad formation and its acceleration is going to have a very significant strategic impact on the South Asian security environment for 5 reasons. Because Pakistan has attempted always to maintain a balance. Although we were an ally of the US during the Cold War, but we also maintained close relations with China. And you know very well that in 1971, Pakistan facilitated Dr. Henry Kissinger's visit to China and helped bring China close to the US. And I hope in future Pakistan will continue to play this role when there is a need. I think Pakistan wants to be seen as a geo-economic bridge between emerging, rising or status quo powers rather than being an ally of one against the other. That is beyond the logic and interest of Pakistan's national interest. Pakistan wants to become a regional hub of intra-regional connectivity. That requires us to have balanced relations. We have large market in the US and West. We have close security relations with China. We are building CPEC, but we are also exploring new regional markets in Afghanistan and Iran. So that requires a foreign policy which makes Pakistan acceptable to all, and rather than becoming ally of one against the other. However, it is very important to say India is using this current phase of its relationship with the US to attract high-tech weapon systems and technology, which will seriously affect the strategic equation in South Asia, whether it is Army, whether it is Navy, whether it is Air Force, or even in the WMD domain. The membership of strategic export control regime will allow India exceptional access to high-tech weapon systems and technology. This will affect the US interest. Long-standing US interests have been to maintain strategic stability in South Asia. It will harm that interest. And secondly, to discourage the proliferation of WMD. So if India builds up using American weapons and technology, it will harm US foreign policy objective of discouraging proliferation of WMD.
I should have asked this earlier, but let's zoom out a bit from South Asia and go to the end of the East and see Australia and Japan jumping into it. Do you think it would be more symbolic of a role, or do you think they're going to do something actively to be a part of this great cartel?
Regarding Australia, I think I'm privileged that I was one of the lucky few people who was part of the first strategic dialogue that Pakistan held with Australia. And I also launched my first book at ANU and spoke at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. I think it is very important, as your Chinese friend also partly mentioned, that the Australian geography is not consistent with its values and defense policy. So it is very important that although it is in Asia Pacific, but the nation largely shares the Western ideology and way of life and interprets its foreign and defense policy according to the Western values. So this is something that is important for the Australian leadership and nation and scholars to consider, that their values, their interests and their geography needs to be reconciled, because it makes no sense to have a defense policy which is against China, but an economic policy which is heavily dependent on trade and investment by China. So they are not compatible with each other.
Thank you very much, Mohammed Ali, for coming in my program. It's such a privilege to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, the problem between China and United States and the upcoming alliances against China are making the security environment of the world more tense. The world is gradually sliding toward another era of Cold War, and if this does not stop through dialogue and discussion or negotiations, this will generate a further acceleration in arms race at the expense of education, health and infrastructure, and bread for the poorest of the world. We'll join you next week with another program, and until then, Allah Hafiz.